on the list this week, Jim Beasley, happy birthday.
All right. We just got to do the official sticker.
Yeah, no.
Are we gonna take it a hat next?
2 days ago, right? On the 18th?
Yeah, 3 days.
Okay.
Wednesday.
So, but the idea here is, I mean, if we're going to build community, it's kind of nice to know. Now, some people don't want to wear the sticker. That's fine. That's okay. You can stay an island, but you know.
You can see that Dennis and I have a
I was gonna
philosophical
say that
difference.
there is
Yes.
an age at
Yes.
which you're proud to be there.
But the idea is that the people, these companies are passed out on Wednesday nights, and probably 50 people out of the church see that list.
That's
So,
right.
so now they're in the Sunday school boxes with little stickers if anybody wants to wear one. Today is Joe Gross's birthday.
Yes, and Joe is the other one.
Yeah.
Joe is
Yeah.
the-
Right.
Joe's actually today.
Yeah.
Has his brother passed on?
We have, Joe was supposed to teach today, I'll go a little out of order. He's not able to be here because his brother is not doing well. I put that in the email, didn't I?
Yeah, right.
And so his brother has some pretty serious health issues that he felt he needed to be with his brother. So we are happy to have Terry Wayne.
Yeah.
Hey, Terry,
Yes,
big hitter.
we are.
Although, I don't guess you're gonna tell any gross jokes. Just sitting there. Actually, that was Joe's joke from last week, so it literally was a gross joke.
Yes, it
So anyway, announcements. I'm not gonna be able to get through them all because I want to give Terry.
While you're looking at those, Henry, Nathan Tatman is here with us today.
Yes, I'm sorry, Nathan. Welcome,
Yeah.
Nathan.
Yes.
I've seen you around for a few months now.
Yeah, a couple of months.
Yeah, okay, so
We're
welcome.
glad you're here. We're glad you're here.
And then Dale is a
Dale Cohen.
regular and now a member.
I think I should go find my dad, because I think he's looking.
Oh, okay.
Where is he?
He's out looking for you. That's right.
Yeah, he was here.
And then Barbara and Don Floyd are with us again today.
And the
So.
boys are back.
Yep.
So, the picnic. Am I skipping ahead? Wait, I won't say that just yet. On Wednesday nights, we're continuing with the gospel overview that George Mason is teaching. Brian was there last week. I was there. I thought it was very good.
He's there.
And Nate was there.
He covered
And
Mark,
the Floyds were there.
and he'll do Matthew.
Did I forget anybody who was there? Anyway, I thought it was a very, very good, they did Mark last week, we'll do Matthew and Luke next week, and then John was out finally. Also on Wednesday nights, they're doing a hymn writing seminar. I guess, is that Doug Heyman? Well, now we have a presentation by Brian. Reunited. So that's the other class on Wednesday nights, also from 6 to 6:45, 7. The Toppers are having a baby shower, or we're having a baby shower for Jake and Melissa Topper. We have a card to sign, and if you want to donate money for a gift card that we'll get for them, that Diane will get for them, or no, Dennis will get for them.
No, Diana's kidding. I'm rapping it.
Oh, okay, that's right. You can just put the money in the card,
Or in the envelope, wherever.
in the envelope. And two other things I was going to mention, although there are other things I know I'm not mentioning.
We'll collect again next week, because I think it's not until the 6th.
Right, yeah, it's still a few weeks off. On May 6th, there will be 2 events. First of all, right after the 11 o'clock service, Tim Krause is going to, I guess he's going to talk in both services about a book that he wrote about his son Theo, which Laura is pulling up right now.
Well, they do it this morning also, George interviewed.
Oh, is it today?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Okay, today in worship he's speaking, and then on May 6th he will
And
have
Theo will be here then.
For a luncheon.
okay, for a luncheon, okay. So they are longtime members of Wilshire, and for those of you that don't know, Theo had a really horrible mountain biking accident with spinal cord injury. It's amazing that he is, I mean, I've met him after the accident. I'd never met him before, and I would have never known that anything had happened to him.
And they told him that night that he would never walk again, he might have some use of his arm. And he's now snowboarding and doing all the
Yeah.
extreme sports that others love.
So that will be happening May 6th, and also our annual picnic, oh, that's not May 6th, that's May 20th, Wilshire at the Lake. We have a big advertisement about that. May 20th will be Wilshire at the Lake, 5 to 7 at Winthrop Point at White Rock Lake. More details about that. If you want to see what food to bring, just whatever your last name's initial of your last name, and then there are certain categories, salads or fruits or vegetables or desserts. Any other announcements that I know that there are other things that I haven't mentioned about the trips. I'll just repeat that in general. That we have a lot of upcoming trips to the Holy Land, to retracing the steps of the march, Martin Luther King's march through Alabama, and a trip to Tanzania. So those are all details. There are all details about those in the tapestry. And Jerry Baker would like to do a plug for.
Real quick, I have a plug for the Wilshire Library. It isn't very often that we have the mother of an award-winning author as our teacher.
Mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, this book is called Her One and Only. It's by Becky Wade, and it is the winner this year for contemporary fiction by the award is called a Christie, and it's given by the Christian Booksellers Association, and it's a huge deal because they do it in genres. And I used to be, when I was congregational librarian here, I was a judge for the Christies, and so you get like, I don't know, 30 or 40 titles, and so this was chosen, and it is in the Wilshire Library. So congratulations, Becky. For Becky.
A better job of introducing Terry than I could. Yes. So anyway, I think everybody's pretty familiar with Terry, so I'll dismiss to say anything more and turn the time back over to you.
I told them when I came in, I'm sort of becoming the proverbial bad thing. I just keep turning up.
Well, I guess you have a lot of experience with both teaching and substitute teaching, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I admire substitutes. I'm not sure I'm brave enough to do that in school, but I did spend a lot of time teaching in schools.
Prayer requests going around with both parts.
Okay. Since Joe was not able to be here this morning, he graciously shared all the notes that he had already gathered for his lesson. And so most of his comes from David Hester's commentary on the Old Testament. And then I pulled information from a book I have called Erdman's Bible Dictionary. It is just a great quick reference with a lot of good information. And I also have a book called The Literary Guide to the Bible. And I really enjoy it because it really sort of gets into how well some of these books are written. And a lot of the themes and symbolisms and all of those things that sometimes we don't always pick up on. And then also I use the introduction of the NIV study Bible for some of this. And we also had, and I think I mentioned this the last time I was here, we have a Jewish Torah with commentary, which is fun because you get to start at the back and go totally counterintuitive to the way we read, but it sometimes has really good information. So let me start with a little background on Samuel. It was originally one book until they translated it into Greek, which we know as the Septuagint. And that kind of became the tradition for future translations, that we have 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. And the writer of the book is definitely someone after Solomon's time, after the division of the kingdoms. And he obviously had access to a lot of records. and they're not quite sure when this book was written, except they know it was written well after, say, I love going backwards. So it covers 1105, when is about the time they think Samuel was born, BC, of course. And it goes up through the end of David's reign to about 970 BC. But this book may well have been written any time from 930 BC all the way up to maybe 400 BC, because this book was, a lot of the books in the Old Testament, they come from a variety of sources, and they put them together, and then they established how they would be divided up: Genesis, Exodus, 1st and 2nd Samuel. So, and of course we have overlapping narratives. 1st and 2nd Chronicles and 1st and 2nd Kings will have some of this information also. But let's just say, where you have been right now, what you've finished up with Judges and so forth, things are not well in the life of Israel right now. By the end of the book of Judges, Israel is seen as a community in moral chaos, engaged in brutality, and betrayed by depending on gods other than Yahweh. And I think that came from the Hester commentary. They were existing in a tribal mode of life, and they were interacting with other tribes, and they were mixing the gods here and there, and there was an awful lot of military barbarism. Israel wants and is waiting for a king who will pull them together, will protect them, will liberate them, and will create basically a politically powerful community. They want a kingdom. And so, I can't help but read the Old Testament and think, okay, God's going to try again. He's going to try to get these people on the right track. And if they want a king, well, maybe we'll try a king. And so here we go with him creating this scenario where they're going to get a king. And one of the commentaries, I think it was the literary commentary, that says, we tend to have Samuel, Saul, and David. But instead of looking at 3 individual stories, we really need to look at them as conflicts. So that we start with Samuel and Saul and that situation, and then we have the Saul and David conflict, and then toward the end of these books, our middle to end, we have David in conflict with both the legacies of Saul and Samuel. So there's an awful lot that goes along. But the books of Samuel, according to the commentaries, they really show the transition between the tribal existence and the development of this centralized political kingdom. They narrate how deep this shift is, and how radical the transformation is going to be for Israel. And Israel ceases to be marginal. It becomes a player, so to speak. It becomes a relevant social and political power. One of the commentators talks about how so often we read the Bible and we can kind of feel like we ought to be pious about it. We ought to take it so seriously. But Walter Brueggemann says this is unlaundried history. It's messy power struggles. It's sexual exploitation, and it is terrific violence. And another literary source writes that in no other biblical books have these levels of narrative about priesthood, the ark, prophetic movements, wars, the chronic presence of blood feud, the role of kings and their officers, household strife, been written, has been put together and sustained, as well as 1st and 2nd Samuel do it. It says that Samuel is the centerpiece of the Hebrew Bible's continuous historical account. But the books of Samuel begin with a barren woman believing that Yahweh could and would intervene in her life. And so we come to the story of Samuel. But first, let me ask you, who is Samuel? What do you know about him? How important is he?
The last of the, is he last of the judges?
He's the last of the judges, and he's the first of the prophets.
Is he the one that had some sons that were pretty wild?
Well, actually, Eli is the one that has a problem,
Eli.
but Samuel's sons are not a whole lot better. And we'll touch on that later, yeah. It is interesting because, quite frankly, I don't know about y'all, but I've always, you hear the story about Samuel, he anoints Saul, Saul messes up, he anoints David, and he's sort of this peripheral character. But according to the experts, he is close to Moses' stature in the Hebrew world because he initiated the rule of kings in this dynastic line that is going to be carried through for hundreds of years. But he is also the one that tried to provide a covenant continuity as they moved into this more political, that trying to keep them in touch with the covenant that they had with, that they were supposed to honor with God. And the thing about it is, he understood the inherent conflict that was facing the Israelites. This idea is we're going to have a king, but God's going to be the great king. Well, we all know human nature. And Samuel understood human nature, and he knew that there was going to be an inevitable disloyalty to God as people put their faith in the human king. And so he really provided a model of faith and leadership for Israel as they made this transition. And he tried to make them aware of the dangers of what they were going in. But he obeyed God. He did what he felt like God was calling him to do, even though he didn't necessarily think it was a good idea to have a king. So we begin with his birth. And so let's look at verses 1 through 8. Would someone like to read? Just read 2 or 3 verses at a time. Anyone want to start? Okay, Linda?
There was a certain man of Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his town to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival used to provoke her severely to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on, year by year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?
Why was it so important for her to have a child? I mean, her husband loved her more than he loved the other wife who had the children.
Just taboo in their culture.
Yeah, not to have children.
In that culture, if you didn't have kids, like, God, they were considered a blessing of God, right?
Yeah.
So you were doing something wrong in life if you didn't have children.
But what's her husband's attitude?
He doesn't care.
I love you more than I love this other woman.
Am I not
What's your
enough?
problem? Yeah, am I not enough? But you know, right away, as you say, and quite frankly, some of you may be old enough to remember this, this has not gone away.
No.
A woman who cannot have children still can find that there are women who sort of lord it over them in subtle ways. And so she really is, even though he obviously must be a well-to-do man, she is, in the sense of the society, a marginalized person. She lacks status. And it really bothers her. And then we go to her name, by the way, means grace or favor. And then in verse 9 through 19, she is a desperate person, and she begins to pray, to plead, to promise. After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow, O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazarite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. Would someone like to read 12 through 19?
As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine. But Hannah answered, No, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time. Then Eli answered, Go in peace, the God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him. And she said, Let your servant find favor in your sight. Then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. In due time Hannah conceived, and she bore a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I have asked him of the Lord.
What is your reaction to what happened in this passage? First off, let's talk about she's praying, and what does Eli think?
Okay, she's mouthing words, but no sound is coming out.
Yeah, she's mouthing words. And by the way, the Jewish Torah suggests that this is the way women are supposed to pray, with their eyes closed, their lips moving, but no words coming out. Now, I think there may be more to it here than how to pray.
Well, it sounds like maybe not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, that some people might just say that, you know. But here is, you know, she's praying for a son, and she's going to give him up.
And he doesn't get to drink or shave.
Yeah, he doesn't get to drink or shave. Which again, the Torah had an interesting thing, is that no one else can choose for a person to be a Nazirite. That while Hannah said this, that ultimately it would have been up to Samuel to choose to continue that that was not something that someone else could impose on a person. What does she gain? What does she
She
gain?
gains status in society.
She gains
The fact
status
that
in
she-
society.
Fulfillment.
She gains fulfillment. You know, Eli, again, we have someone, he's a very privileged person. He does his job. And I may mention this again later, he's not evil, even though his sons are terrible and he doesn't do much about them. He's not an evil person, he's maybe just inept. You know, that's what one of the commentaries says, he just doesn't get it, you know, and that's what we have here. He just doesn't get it, because she's not, she's praying in a way that he doesn't see. She's praying with a passion that he's not used to seeing. So she
really has a broken heart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the thing about it is, when you look at what she's praying for, she seems to see a link between her desperate need and God at work in the world. There is this real sense that God can do something, you know. Whether or not he does is another issue. It's her faith that he can do something. Now, I had a question here. You know, sometimes there's almost, when we read these stories, there almost seems to be, they prayed and God answered. You know, it's sort of, and they promised something and God answers. It's almost a tit for tat kind of mentality here. And I think we have to be really careful about that. You know, that model prayer about the Lord's will being done. God is trying to accomplish something also. And, you know, how many prayers are linked to something greater than the issue at hand? Because that's what we have here. There's something greater in the works than maybe Hannah understands. Although part of being, I mean, she's part of Israel, so she knows most likely, she knows they want a king. But you see what I'm getting at? Is that, is the will of God being done in relation to what is being asked in the prayer? So that's a real crucial thing when we talk about someone praying and then God answering prayer. And I can't even go there because, I don't even begin to understand it. Let me put it that way. It has so much to do with when our prayers are not answered, you know, are we doing something wrong, or have we not prayed for the right thing? We don't always have an understanding of this. But we do have this model of Hannah having this faith that God has the power to act. And I don't know, I don't know about y'all, but every once in a while, you look around you and you kind of wonder, does he? Or will he? You know, because of everything that you see. And so it takes a great deal of faith and fidelity on the part of Hannah in this desperate situation to maintain that belief that God does act. What we have here is that Yahweh is a key actor in these books. And in our times of trouble, we are invited to keep a focus on God and on a larger vision of who He is and what His vision for us and for the world might be. So, you know, we look at this, And then we have Hannah breaking out in song. They go back, she gets pregnant, and she is going to take the child back to Shiloh. He's going to stay with her for about 3 years until he's weaned. And then she takes him to Eli. And we've already met Eli. He's a little clueless, or seems to be. I'm being facetious here, but she takes him to Eli. And she says that she wants him to be in God's service. And Eli is the priest at Shiloh who is in charge of everything, so she takes him to Eli. And then we have her song. And what I'm going to do, Joe made a copy of this, and Dennis ran it off for us. So if you would pass these down.
So, Terry, was Hannah aware of Eli's sons? And
Sure.
I mean,
It would have been hard not to.
I would, I guess I would have thought there was some concern about turning over my child to Eli, given that his son is
Yeah, true. But see, Eli, in his capacity as priest, we have to kind of separate priest and father. As priest, Eli, was doing a reasonably good job, I guess you would say. But God now has another plan through Samuel. And so and we'll get to him in a minute. But, obviously that's a very legitimate observation to make, Ken. If his sons are out of control, what makes you think? But
I just saw him as a father who didn't know how to discipline and ultimately brought his family
yeah,
down.
but how many, I've worked with teachers who were phenomenal teachers, and their kids were horror stories.
Well, look at
And in fact, we can't really go there because we don't have time, but all you have to do is look at the difference between Eli being called a priest and to the priesthood, Samuel being called to the priesthood. And this is I'm kind of jumping ahead here because there's a passage, the next passage after the song that's not really in our scripture today, has to do with the situation where Eli is going to be told, you're out. Your whole family is out of the priesthood. Samuel is taking over. And Eli's okay with it. Eli's okay with it. He has his own level of faith. He functions at a decent level as priest. It's just as father that he's not terribly good. So Samuel is destined, to follow the model of Eli and to surpass it. Okay, does that make sense? But that's true. I think, and all we have to do is look at modern times and some of our leading preachers whose children should not have followed in their footsteps. Whether, I lived in Tulsa, so Oral Roberts, he tried to get Richard to follow. That was a disaster. And we could name others. Schiller in California.
Well, for a time, Franklin Graham
Yeah.
was a wayward child.
Well,
Prodigal son.
I think if you look at the difference between his father's ministry and his ministry, I don't think you get Billy.
That's true.
So you see what we're getting at here, is that it's not something that can be inherited. The calling of the Lord cannot be inherited. It comes to each person individually, whatever they are doing. So anyway, we look at this song, and y'all have a copy of it. And this is Hannah's prayer, and it is Mary's song. And Hannah's song is a precursor to Mary's. So I want you to, I'd like for this side of the table to take Hannah's prayer song, this side take Mary's, and y'all can do whatever you want down there. Look through it and look for the themes. Look for what they emphasize. And let me give you just a few minutes to do that. And see what they're concerned about.
Let's pick it up on your email.
Okay. In Hannah's song, you know, she is a happy woman. And I have to say, there was one little part of it that kind of bothered me. That line, "My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory." That sounded a little bit like gloating. But the rest of it, you know, there is some powerful stuff in here. What does Hannah have to, what do you notice about Hannah's song?
The Lord gives and the Lord takes.
What?
The Lord gives
And the Lord takes.
And he can take things as they are and make them completely different.
And he can take things as they are and make them completely different.
She gives him all the credit for everything.
Yeah, she gives him all the credit. And is that in Hannah or in Mary?
Well,
Because they both do. They both speak to the power of God. But it's also interesting. Look at who they're mentioning. Now, you know, we talk. Mary's the mother of Jesus. That's kind of a big deal. But remember, before, when she's just pregnant,
she was scary.
she was marginalized big time. I mean, if it hadn't been for Joseph's attitude, they probably could have taken her out and stoned her because that was the law. So here she is, a young woman and yet she is able to sing this song. She is able to give, talk about the mighty one, the holy one. Hannah talks about the rock. But look who they talk about. Arrogance versus humility. The lowly versus the rich. In all of these, it's the people who in their societies would be the marginalized people. The people who would be without power, without hope. And throughout this, and in fact, I started, you can't see this, but the first time I took this, I had my yellow marker trying to draw lines, you know, from proud, humble, and rich, poor, and all of that, because they are so similar in what they are saying. And there is this sense of judgment, that God will judge all of this in both of these. In fact, Hannah says in verse 9, he will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might does one prevail. God is all powerful, but it is not the powerful, the human powerful, which is so fascinating, because she ends this, he will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed. There's a real contradiction in there. Yeah, there's a real contradiction in there, because she is a product of her environment. She is a product of her tribe. So she's still got that little thing about the earthly power here, the king going. But overall, both of these songs really speak to the worth and dignity of every individual. And it's really a remarkable, that we have both of these songs that basically are telling us the same thing. God likes humility. God likes justice. God favors those who have been hurt or who have been made less in society. So it's really an issue of humbleness and justice and God's power throughout this. And they are singing joyfully that message of God's power. Now, one of the commentaries has this to say: this exuberant poem expresses the historical outlook of both biblical tradition in general and of Samuel in particular. Yahweh is invoked as the God of surprise, bringing down the mighty, raising up the downtrodden, impoverishing the wealthy, and enriching the pauper, bereaving the fertile, and making the barren fruitful, always circumventing the trappings of human vanity and the complacency of the over-contented. Is that not a strong statement? I mean, it pretty much says what the whole Bible says. These songs are a reflection of that. The many turns of personal and familial fortune in the ensuing chapters are an elaboration of the ideas that are compressed into Hannah's song. It is a powerful poem about Yahweh. Brevard Childs, in his introduction to the Old Testament as Scripture, says that this poem is an interpretive key for the books of Samuel. That is, the power and willingness of Yahweh to intrude, intervene, and invert is the main theme of the books of Samuel. And God is a God of justice who turns the ways world of doing things upside down. And I would add, because I think it's clear, he is a God who responds to the marginalized and makes them a larger part of his plan. Now, I've sort of summarized what comes next about how Eli gets a visit from one of those men of God who tells him, you're through, your family's through, and Eli is kind of like, okay, that's the way it's, God is God, and so that's why, and that's one of the things that makes Eli acceptable, I guess, because when the chips are down, if this is what God wants, then I'm going with God on this. And then we come to the last part of the lesson, which is Samuel being turned over to Eli, and
At age 3.
at age 3. And he's,
Why would he want someone at 3?
well, he's past the terrible twos.
He's a worker. It's scary.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's totally.
That's why I thought that.
You never thought about that
And we have to remember, these are stories that are put together from a variety of sources that have been brought together to try to give us this historical view. You know, maybe he was a little bit older than that, but this is what it signifies. And we have the dream sequence. So if we want to take, I think we have time here. Well, that's right, it's 1 through 20. Maybe I should just summarize this so we can go on. But basically, as he gets older, he has this dream. And remember when I was here with Moses, I kept talking about the here I am? Well, he's hearing this voice. And Samuel runs into Eli and he says, here I am. And Eli says, I didn't call you. Go back. It happens 3 times. What else? You know, this is 3 times. It has to happen 3 times almost for it to be symbolic. And he goes in 3 times. Here I am, here I am, here I am. And Eli finally says, it's not me that's calling you. The next time that he calls, you are to respond with, speak, for your servant is listening. And so in verse 10, this is what it says. Now the Lord came and stood there calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. Then the Lord said to Samuel, see, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever. And Samuel lies there. And then Eli says, tell me what he said. And Samuel is going, no, I don't want to do that. And Eli says, do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me of all that he told you. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. Then he said, it is the Lord, let him, Eli says, let him do what seems good to him. So we have in Eli, even though he's inept at times, we do have a faithfulness there. We do have a willingness to go with what seems to be God's plan. And then this chapter ends with Samuel, with it saying, Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. And he is a pivotal figure, even when Samuel's not in the picture in the books of Samuel. He is the pivotal figure, one of the pivotal figures. And, you know, as I said, Samuel is going to create a fresh initiative in Israel's life. And he's uneasy with this idea of king. And because he understands what humans do, especially when they gain power. So, in conclusion, let me say this. God does not force fidelity and faithfulness. He responds to it, as he did with Hannah. The Old Testament has several recurring themes, and some of them are touched on today. First, God is a humble God. He keeps the door open to finding new ways to turn people toward Him. He's tried flood and covenant and Judges, Exodus and Judges. He keeps coming back and keeping the door open for the Israelites to be faithful to Him and to keep us faithful. He keeps opening doors, putting people in our paths that will help us stay faithful. Even in our deepest moments of trouble, we know that God will open doors for us. He will help us find our way back if we will let him. And that's what we have, one of the things that we have here. The problem is that sometimes we become part of the powerful. We become part of the privileged. And it's very easy to come to think of ourselves as superior. And so we have to be careful, whether it's as Christians or as Americans, as people who live pretty comfortable lives. We have to look back to the kind of service and sacrifice. Look at Hannah. She sacrifices her child. Without any guarantee she's going to have other children. Now, she does have other children, but you understand what I'm saying here. She understands this concept of faithfulness and fidelity. Corollary to this faithfulness is tied up with the plight of the marginalized. And so we have God using someone who is marginalized to bring us this example of faith. Now, another major theme here is also the reciprocal promises made between God and faithful individuals. It's really that extension. We talk so much about the covenant of the Old Testament with the Jews. We forget, or, well, I forget, I won't put this on you, but so often we sort of forget that that covenant is constantly being played out by individuals instead of the tribe. So I think that's one of the things that we find here. The individual gets what the tribe doesn't always get, so to speak. And God validated Hannah, and the Old Testament is full of this. Now, I will say that the commentaries talks about Hannah, that this whole story is a metaphor for Israel waiting for the king. But unfortunately, Israel's not going to have Hannah's faith and fidelity. They're not going to respond to what God is going to give them in this nation the way that Hannah responds in giving her son into service. They're not going to give the nation into service, which then leads to all of this bloody family warfare and all other kinds of horrible things that go on here. But the real big idea here is that Yahweh is in control. Hannah's song and Mary's song clearly make the argument. The caveat is that the Lord's faithfulness is reflected in the faithfulness of his individual followers. How are his followers willing to serve and sacrifice out of their understanding of what God has given them? How do God's followers reflect what is in that song? Humility, justice, mercy that comes from the power that God gives each of us. When we make decisions, we always get to make decisions out of humility, out of justice, out of mercy, out of faith, the way Hannah did. So the books of Samuel begin with great expectations for a king who will be Messiah-like. But true to Samuel's concerns, earthly kings will not be capable of being faithful or meeting the deepest needs of the people. Instead, there will be individuals faithful to the power, mercy, justice, and humility of God. And God will turn to those people, and they're often marginalized people, to fulfill his plans, to fulfill his will. And he will ultimately send a carpenter, a lowly workman, to live his will among the marginalized. Hannah got it. may we get it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks.
Thank you, Terry.
So we mentioned at the start about Joe Gross's brother, I'm sorry, yes,
John.
Joe's brother, John.
John.
And he suffers from torn aorta. That's the issue that they're concerned about. Christina Montgomery, death of her grandmother Rita. I don't recognize the handwriting on this one.
Me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Nathan.
Is this a friend
Friend of mine.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. The T-Bows asked for continuing prayers for Jeff in his medical school studies.
Did you take that test?
Yes, and so that's the,
Do you want to?
so he's passed his courses, but he has to pass his comp. And he did not do it last week. He gets a second chance this Tuesday, so that's another round. And hopefully, and then they come home on Tuesday, or Friday, they come back to Texas.
So she
So,
also
Like
asked
for a
for
visit,
safe travels.
or
For
is this,
good.
is he
well,
gonna do
I
this
guess it
with
just
his?
depends on what happens.
On that, okay.
Yeah.
Diana asks for continuing prayers for her parents. House inspection went well. They close on May 3rd.
All right.
Yeah. For better, for worse.
Jerry, I think, shared this. I hope y'all don't mind. I'm starting to recognize your handwriting. Call y'all out.
You can do that.
Dennis taught me how to do it. So. Jerry asked for prayers for Mark Wingfield. For those of you that don't know, I think everybody knows Mark Wingfield, but that don't know about his current situation, he's really having a tough time. It started out, I'm going to get the details wrong, but it started out as some pinched nerve in the top of his spine, base of his neck, and he went in for surgery, and things just got a lot worse. In fact, at one point, the doctor said, "I'm surprised that you can walk." I mean, it was, and I think that they are still uncertain about causation issues here, about what happened in the surgery. I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions. But he's having a rough go of it.
He did not, he decided last Sunday, we left Monday morning, the New Song Choir went to Branson last week, and we left Monday morning at 7:30. He decided Sunday afternoon that he would not go with us.
Yeah.
So he waited that long, and I'm
That's
sorry,
a
I don't
big
know
deal for
any,
Mark to make that
Yeah.
decision.
really, and I don't know
Yeah.
anything about medical procedure, but there's something called a blood patch, is that right? And you apparently have to lay on your back for 24 hours. I mean, he is really, he really needs that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had, I think,
You quit
because I
bumping
talked to him
out.
last week after service, because he was having those problems after surgery, they did a myelogram on him to see what was going on, because the MRI was a little bit questionable. It was after the myelogram that he got a spinal headache, and they had to do the blood patch. So he was still having issues with headaches, which I think is why.
Whatever it is, it's
Well,
especially a constriction.
So it has not only a physical, I mean, he is not only experiencing physical pain, but because of the type of personality that Mark is, I mean, he is a go-to, get it done kind of person, and this is just not, this doesn't fit with his schedule.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And so he and his family really need prayers. And the thing that and I think other people would say this as well, that I think makes Wilshire work so well is that we don't have what some other congregations would call a pastor, where it's just sort of a top-down management and they just do everything for us and we just receive